I think we're going to win these votes. I certainly hope so. I thank you very much, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. President, I have 8 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President.
The senator from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. President, we as a country are in a very, very serious financial circumstance, and we all know that we have to reduce spending. This year we will spend $3.7 trillion and, we will spend $3.7 trillion, but take in only $2.2 trillion. 40 cents of every dollar is borrowed. The President acknowledged a stunning development that under his budget that he submitted 2 months ago, something I've repeatedly talked about, in the 10th year, the amount of interest on our debt will be almost $1 trillion. This is fact. We are on an unsustainable course, as every witness has told us. You've got to do better. You cannot continue in this fashion any longer. The President's Debt Commission Chairman, Mr. Erskine Bowles and Senator Alan Simpson, former Senator Simpson, they've told us that we're facing the most predictable debt crisis in our history if we don't change. And they didn't say it's for our children and grandchildren. They said it could happen in 2 years. Mr. Bowles said earlier than 2 years, a little later. Senator Simpson said, I think we could have a debt crisis in 1 year. So I don't know. Hopefully this won't happen. But we've got to get spending under control. There are 2 ways to do it. One is to work really hard, do what we're paid to do, identify the less productive, less defensible spending programs and eliminate them and try to protect as much as we can the programs that are more productive and doing better good for America. Our other way to do it is just sort of take everything across the board and just eliminate everything on the same percentage basis and reduce spending that way. You could do either. I think most people would say we should eliminate the programs that are least defensible first before we have to reduce spending in programs that are more justified. And, of course, none of the proposals that have been made by Congressman Ryan in the House reduce spending for Medicare, Social Security, or Medicaid. They reduce the growth in those spending programs, but they don't reduce spending for them. But regardless, how do we make the decision? So I've heard the debate about the Planned Parenthood and the monies they get. I've not been particularly knowledgeable about it. I serve as ranking member of the Budget Committee, so I know something about the debt crisis we're in. So the question is Planned Parenthood a program that is less defensible in order to have its funding eliminated or reduced significantly, so other programs that are more defensible don't have to be cut. I'm looking at the facts about the situation, and I find that the Planned Parenthood has far more difficulty defending its legitimacy as a federal recipient of millions of dollars than other institutions. This is a private group that sets about to do all kinds of things. One of the largest things it does is provide abortions, and it's an advocacy group. They have very strong agendas that a lot of American people do not agree with, and why should we fund it? There are lots of other organizations out here all over America that do what they think to be good things and aren't funded by the United States government. So let's just look at it a little bit. I was sort of surprised, actually. In 2009, the last year we've gotten a report, Planned Parenthood reported providing 332,278 abortions in the United States. I didn't know that. 332,000? This is the highest total ever recorded and the 15th consecutive year that the number of abortions they have provided has increased. Overall, though, abortions in the United States are going down. You see that sonogram and you see that unborn child and other things or whatever, the mood of the American people are getting a lot more uneasy about this idea of life and taking of unborn life. So overall, abortions have decreased by almost 25% in the past 2 decades nationwide, voluntarily been reduced by individual decisions by Americans. Yet during that same time, Planned Parenthood abortions have doubled. And Planned Parenthood consistently claims that abortions account for only 3% of their services. 97% is on other projects, they say. But yet in that same fact sheet that they make that assertion, they state that 12%, that's more than 1 in 10, of their health care patients receive an abortion. Whew, that's a surprise to me. Think about that. They state that 12%, that's more than 1 in 10, of their health care patients that come in to, they receive an abortion. So what about the other solutions? Aren't there other solutions to pregnancies that, other than abortion? In 2009, their report indicates that Planned Parenthood made 1 adoption referral for every 340 abortions performed. They made a scant 977 adoption referrals compared to over 330,000 abortions. That's a decline of almost 60% from 2008. So this is a major change in what's going on at Planned Parenthood. In 2008, they did 60% more referrals when it made 2,400 adoption referrals. So I just say it appears that this is an advocacy organization that's committed to one solution for people struggling with pregnancies. And I tell you, I've got a letter here. I won't quote it, but I have a letter from a woman in Alabama who had an abortion, who still feels pain about that and wrote me saying not to fund this. I just say that because my colleagues suggested only men would favor this kind of idea. And I'll tell you another thing that I did not know and was very surprised about, how much money this is. No wonder there's a big brouhaha here, because this is a lot of money. Congress is providing $363 million a year to Planned Parenthood. That's a lot. Over 10 years, as we've been scoring everything here over a 10-year budget, that's about $4 billion, and quite a lot of money. And a lot of people in the country feel strongly that, okay, the Supreme Court has ruled on this. They've said what the Constitution says. Abortions under some circumstances cannot be prohibited under the Supreme Court ruling. But they're saying the federal government doesn't have to pay for it, fund it, don't have to use my taxpayer money to do so. And so my colleagues say, well, we agree with that principle and we're not funding abortions. We're giving the money to Planned Parenthood, but they're not able to use it for abortions. But if 12% of their patients are obtaining abortions and they're getting $300 million, I think that's a fact. So I just would say I think it's a fact that the federal funding furthers their ability to grow and expand their lead as the #1 abortion provider in the country. So, Mr. President, I think all in all, we don't have enough money to do a lot of good things. We have, some people forget, rural health clinics and urban health clinics that are funded and organized by the United States Congress. We don't have to use money in this fashion to this private entity that has an agenda. I don't believe it's radical to say that this is one place that we could save money out of, and there are a lot more. I don't think it's extreme. That's my best judgment, that if we don't have enough money, 40% of what we spend is borrowed. I don't want to borrow $363 million this year to fund a program that we don't have the money for. And this is one that I think we could legitimately say does not have to have taxpayers' money and should be have its funding terminated. I also would support the resolution concerning the health care bill. It clearly is a piece of legislation that costs the taxpayers large sums of money, and it is not a piece of legislation that adds money to the Treasury, as has been suggested. The Congressional Budget Office has written a letter to me that stated explicitly that the administration is double counting the money, and if you weren't double counting the money they took from Medicare to fund this new program, that you would clearly have the health care bill would be a clear drain on the economy. They have to use a gimmick of double accounting through an accounting process here to justify that, and it's not the right way to do it. It's the reason the country is going broke. So I would ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, to revise and extend my remarks on both of these subjects, and would
Without objection, so ordered.
And would yield the floor.
Senator from Missouri is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for recognition. I want to talk today about another topic, a topic that Mr. Kirk and I and 36 other members of the Senate are co-sponsoring a bill that, an amendment that we would hope to add to the small business bill if we ever get back to the small business bill. This is an amendment that we offered independently as a bill a month ago, the Gas Accessibility and Sustainability Act. And what this bill really does is it takes further an effort that was put into law in 2005, right before Hurricane Katrina, that allowed the President to suspend the unique boutique fuel standards in the country if there was a natural disaster. And, Mr. President, that happened immediately, almost within a couple of weeks, as I recall, after the bill became law. The President used that authority, and in the 6 months following Katrina, even though the Gulf was obviously disrupted and a couple of refineries were very disrupted, gas prices didn't go up because for the first time since the passage of the Clean Air Act, gasoline was a commodity again. And what this bill would do, as we now see gasoline prices at $4.37 in Hawaii, at $3.88 in St. Louis, and particularly prices that are high in communities that have a unique blend of fuel that's only available in that community, this bill would allow the President to have that authority if there's any kind of disruption, if the Suez Canal was shut down for some period of time, if a refinery went down, if there was a pipeline disruption that truly made it very difficult for communities to get their unique blend of fuel, but was much easier for you to just get fuel that met the standard of being fuel at the gas pump. And Mr. Kirk and I introduced this together. He was a great advocate of this bill when it passed the House, and I'd like to turn to him for a moment and see what he has to say today about this bill that really allows us to look at the gas prices that are creating real problems in the country today.
Mr. President, I note that under the blunt legislation, we would correct a growing problem in the United States with gas prices. Right now, for example, in the Chicagoland area, gas prices total about $4.14 a gallon. I'm sure in Missouri it's probably quite high.
Well, it's $3.88 in St. Louis, which would be the area that we have that uses, again, the most specialty fuel.
And this map shows, it's a very complicated map, but what it shows is that by federal regulation, the federal government has divided the national gasoline market up into 17 separate submarkets. And these 17 separate submarkets all have of gasoline. And by federal regulation, you cannot use gasoline that was sold in Chicagoland, which under this chart is the Chicagoland-Milwaukee RFG with the ethanol standard. In the St. Louis area, the SRFG standard with ethanol. By creating small, tiny monopolies, we create higher prices for the American people. And I think that's why the blunt legislation is necessary.
Well, I thank Senator for those comments, and I just point out using your chart here that in Missouri you buy one blend of gas in St. Louis, another blend of fuel in the Kansas City area, and a third blend yet in between. And so clearly these areas aren't even unique in the fuel that's used there. If you buy fuel driving from one city to the other and use the other half of the tank while you're driving around to St. Louis, you're using the fuel that is available generally anyhow. This does really a couple of things, and one is it allows in a time where it's hard to get fuel, for any reason, the President to waive those standards. And the other thing it does is cap these fuels so that if the EPA decides under the Clean Air Act that you have a clean air attainment problem in your city, you have to go and look at the existing fuel blends and choose from one of them rather than what had happened in the country up until 2005, which was every city somehow became convinced that there was a unique fuel blend for them that only would work there, that never would quite work anywhere else. And that doesn't make sense. We've headed in the other direction. This legislation heads us a little further and a little faster in a direction to where we don't have these unique blends. We have fuel as fuel again, and fuel, whether it's the restaurateurs that some of us may have seen today, or the various businesses where if fuel's $4 a gallon, something has to give, and maybe it goes throughout the entire economy. This helps solve that problem, and hopefully we can be talking about an energy bill before too long. But clearly, whether it's a small business bill or any other bill, the cost of fuel makes a real difference in the country today. This amendment that we hope to offer eventually to the small business bill is one of the things that helps solve that problem. And
I just want to say that the unhighlighted areas are where regular gasoline is sold, and then the highlighted areas are where these little gasoline monopolies that by federal regulation have been created. What happens if another hurricane hits the Gulf? If this area was lacking its specific kind of gasoline under the current regulations, it could not borrow gasoline from Missouri or Chicagoland or Georgia or anywhere else. So we have created an incredible price rigidity in this system. Long term, I think we should move the country to one clean-burning fuel. But the one thing we should not do is have 17 different submarkets, all now with the ability to charge the American driving public much higher prices than would otherwise be the case. And I commend the gentleman. This is exactly why we need the blunt legislation, and the blunt amendment should pass to address this problem. One of the reasons why gasoline costs too much in the United States.
Well, I think my good friend from Illinois, a long-term proponent of this concept, we're going to continue to work for things that make gasoline and the fuel system work better and make more sense for people all over America. Madam President, I would yield the floor back.
Madam President.
The Senator from Texas.
Madam President, we are today making a small step, a down payment toward getting the runaway federal spending under control. The spending bill that we will vote on today represents a $78 billion spending cut from that President Obama proposed for this year. It will be $38 billion from what the federal government spent last year. We must address the spending binge that our country has been on for the last 2, 4, 6 years. Spending cuts have been actually ignored. We have increased spending in the name of stimulus. The problem is that kind of spending didn't stimulate the economy in the private sector where the jobs are permanent. At the beginning of this year, the President proposed a budget that would spend $3.7 trillion next year with a $1.6 trillion deficit. The national debt is now $14.29 trillion. Under President Obama's budget plan, the national debt would double since he took office and triple by 2020. We then embarked on a very vigorous negotiation on this year's budget. Republicans insisted on cuts beginning now, which is the middle of a fiscal year, which makes it very difficult because the spending levels are already in place for half a year. But we said no. We need to start right now, even if it is hard, even if it is in the middle of the fiscal year. And there was a hard negotiation. We know that because we had a series of 1, 2, and 3-week continuing resolutions that continued the government to go forward, but did not make the final decisions on finishing our fiscal year, September 30, with the cuts that were necessary. You know, part of the negotiation was to avoid a government shutdown. I did not want a government shutdown because in the end, that costs more. It costs more to do all the changes that are necessary to shut down the government and then to make the changes necessary to come back and put it back online. So I think we did the right thing by making those cuts, by taking that first step, and by not shutting down government so that so many people would have been left in the lurch. Federal employees, most certainly we were going to take care of our military, but they shouldn't have had to worry about it. All of the people who had vacations planned, who had airline tickets bought, who wanted to go to our national monuments and parks, all of the people in this country would have had some kind of disruption, and it wasn't necessary if we did the amount of cutting, and we did. But we cannot rest here because the real battle is going to be for cutting the trillions, not the billions. It is the trillions that are going to start getting the deficits down and bring our debt back into line. To do as the President suggested earlier this year and freeze spending at this year's levels would have been like someone who was on a diet saying, I'm just going to eat what I eat now and no more. But that doesn't mean that you lose weight. We all know that. And today the federal government is spending $4 billion every day that we don't have. We add $4 billion every day that we don't have that is debt borrowed from somewhere else. We are borrowing 42 cents on every dollar we spend. Much of that is from the Chinese, and what are we doing? We are giving a bill to our children that is insupportable. That is not just a problem for our grandchildren in the future. It is a problem for today. This year, our interest payments on this mountain of debt have already cost us $190 billion. This year, $190 billion. By 2020, if we go at this rate, annual interest payments on the national debt will more than double. to approximately $778 billion a year interest payments. Now you're going to $750 billion just for interest payments. We cannot allow that to happen. The President made a speech yesterday, and it was a call for action. Unfortunately, I believe the President called for the wrong action. The President says we've got to have taxes that go up and we've got to have spending that goes down together. He proposed raising $1 trillion in tax increases. That's $1 trillion in higher taxes for small business. It is $1 trillion in higher taxes for family farmers. That is not going to help our economy come out of the doldrums. Who is going to be able to hire people if they're going to know that they are going to have a tax burden and a regulatory burden that is going to keep them from being able to expand their operations? Washington has a spending problem, not a taxing problem. We wasted $1 trillion in failed stimulus spending in the first 2 years of the Obama presidency. Now, raising taxes by $1 trillion in the second half of his presidency to pay for a stimulus package that didn't work? Madam President, that does not make sense. The President also believes that a stronger federal government, a more powerful federal government, is the answer to our problems. He proposed yesterday to address Medicare and Medicaid costs by expanding upon the health care reform bill that was pushed through on a completely partisan vote that already is going to increase government. It is going to increase costs, and cuts to Medicare are going to pay for part of that increase. The President would give more power to the unelected bureaucrats on his new independent payment advisory board that is there to cut Medicare payments and reimbursements to doctors. We do not need a bigger, more powerful federal government to address the issues of this mounting debt. We are going to have a vigorous debate on what is the right answer. More powerful federal government and more taxes versus a smaller, more restrained federal government that promotes growth in the private sector to make our economy go. We are approaching the limit on the federal debt ceiling. That is where we must take a stand. That is where we have to draw the line in the sand and say, no more. We cannot raise the limit on the federal debt without reforms taking place that will show that over the next 10 years we have a plan, and the plan is to cut back on the deficit every year. I think the total of around $6 trillion in cuts over a 10-year period is a responsible approach. We will debate some of the things in the proposals that have been put forward. What are the priorities in spending? What will promote growth? What will promote jobs? But we must have a plan before we raise the debt ceiling. Republicans and Democrats can agree on one thing. We do need a combination of spending cuts with revenue increases to get to the trillions that are needed to cut this debt. But the way we define revenue is the answer. The Democrats say revenue means tax increases, and the tax increases are on people who would do the hiring to grow the jobs. So you're putting a damper on the ability to reinvigorate our economy. Republicans are going to argue that the revenue comes from creating jobs, from having more people employed, so they can help with our economy and try to help bring revenue in by being employed in the private sector. Republicans believe that the way to create revenue is build a vigorous economy, to have people working so that they are contributing to the economy, not people who are forced to take benefits because they cannot find a job in this stagnant economy that we all have acknowledged is here. So, Madam President, today I hope that all of us will agree to take the first steps on the responsible spending cuts that will get us through the end of this fiscal year. And I hope that we will come together on next year's budget. The 2012 budget is what we are having hearings on. I had a hearing this morning with the Secretary of Commerce, the FBI Director earlier this week, to assure that we are spending for 2012 in a limited, responsible way and covering the needs of our country and also making the investments that will spur growth in our economy. But the big debate we're going to have is on increasing the debt limit at $14.29 trillion. We must do it with reforms that show the world that is buying our debt that we are going to have a responsible payback to them. I don't want the Chinese to raise the interest rates because they're worried about whether we have the political will to pay them back. We will have the political will to do it if we cut spending, if we increase revenue through job growth, not taxes. We will show the world that debt is good and that interest rates should stay low and that we should work for all of our good to have good trade agreements so that we can build up our jobs and buy things from outside, and those economies will flourish so that they can buy our products. That's what would be a win for everyone, and that's what we will be promoting in the next few months in Washington. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Montana.
I thank the senator from North Carolina. Madam President, I rise today once again on behalf of rural America. Many folks don't understand rural America. We often get painted in broad brush strokes in a way that doesn't reflect the reality that we face. The Montanans who elected me sent me here to bring common sense to the debate over issues that impact rural America. One issue where there's not a lot of common sense is the issue of debit interchange. There's also a lot of misinformation out there about this issue. I've been concerned about the unintended consequences of this proposed rule since the Senate voted on the provision last year. That's why I voted against the amendment when it came to the floor for a vote. Over the past few months, I've been attacked by the big box retailers and called just about every name in the book. My legislation to study the impact of the Fed's proposed rule has been called a bailout. It's pretty interesting, since I was the only Democrat in the Senate to vote against both bailouts. And only in Washington do people say that you're killing a bill by making sure that it does what we want it to do. Now, I certainly don't think the goal of the interchange amendment was to engage in price fixing. I don't think the folks were trying to hurt consumers or small community banks and credit unions. But now we know the impact of this provision is far different than the information that we had when we passed the amendment. Now we know that the regulators tasked with implementing this rule think that it may not work at all. When we passed the amendment, we were told that small banks and credit unions would receive an exemption from the swipe fee rule. Since there's been a lot of misinformation on this issue, let me share these comments directly with my colleagues. In a Banking Committee hearing in February, Chairman Bernanke referred to the exemption for community banks and credit unions, and he said, and I quote, "We are not certain how effective that exemption will be. There is some risk that the exemption will not be effective and that the interchange fees available through smaller institutions will be reduced to the same extent that we would see for larger banks." That means that the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, the guy in charge of implementing the interchange rule, does not think it will work for credit unions or for small mom-and-pop community banks. This is common sense. When you set a price cap, big box retailers will use their market share to force little guys to meet the lower fee. At the same hearing, FDIC Chairwoman Sheila Bair confirmed this, saying, once again a quote, "It remains to be seen whether they," that's the credit unions and community banks, "they can be protected with this. I think they're going to have to make it up somewhere else, probably by raising the fees that they have on transaction accounts. And that means that our credit unions and small community banks will be cutting back on things like free checking or ending it altogether, charging more for loans, cutting back on services to low and moderate income folks in rural America. Despite being tasked with the job of implementing the small bank exemption, the Fed cannot guarantee that the exemption will work in practice. Because despite what some may say, the Federal Reserve cannot control markets. It cannot ensure that this provision will work, since market forces will drive rates down for the community banks and credit unions. No one doubts that rural America's small businesses will be significantly affected by regulating debit card interchange fees. Yet the true and full effects of this regulation on small businesses are not being fully discussed or fairly portrayed. This amendment was an attempt to address a problem. But when you control prices, as this amendment does, you also invite unintended consequences. At first, it might make sense that if you reduce debit card swipe fees, then small businesses will benefit. But once you take a closer look, you find a host of potential problems for small businesses, and no guarantees that consumers will benefit one lick. For instance, a recent study says that only 10% of small businesses are in retail and in a position to accept debit cards. But that same study also says that most small businesses have checking accounts and use debit cards to pay for things that they need to run their businesses. These businesses will end up paying more for basic services like checking accounts, and they'll see more fees, and consumers will be no better off. In short, this limit is bad for small businesses, and it's bad for consumers. Which banking services are likely to be more expensive or disappear entirely as community banks and credit unions seek to make up lost revenue? Well, free checking for one. Millions of Americans have had checking accounts and debit cards because they're free. If banks and credit unions are forced to charge for these services, many business owners and consumers would suffer the consequences. And because the Fed's rules don't allow banks to cover the cost of debit transactions, banks of all sizes are considering limits on debit card purchases. Moms using their debit cards at grocery stores may have to limit their grocery purchases to $50 or $100 on groceries. So what's the alternative? Well, put it on a credit card. But that, Madam President, is a tough option for struggling families. Low and moderate income families may not have access to credit or may have already maxed out their credit card. And pushing consumers toward credit isn't good for small businesses either, because the interchange fees on credit card purchases are higher than those on debit cards. In a recent survey, 3/4 of community banks reported considering imposing annual or monthly debit card fees. 3/5 of them would consider imposing monthly fees on checking account customers. If they start charging folks for just having an account, you can bet these folks won't be customers for long. In the long run, that will devastate rural America. And what does this mean for small businesses that rely on those community banks and credit unions? Without a doubt, the small businesses and communities across Montana rely on community banks and credit unions to keep their doors open, to grow their businesses, and to create jobs. These Main Street institutions are the backbone of this nation's small businesses. In fact, according to a recent National Federation of Independent Businesses report, most small businesses do their banking with smaller institutions. Community banks provide the bulk of small business lending in rural communities, and small business owners receive better treatment from community banks. That's because in rural America, a community bank is part of that community. A handshake still matters. And the folks on both sides of the table can look each other in the eye and be accountable to one another. You're not going to find that on Wall Street. Community banks do the lion's share of lending with the youngest and smallest of small businesses, those best positioned to create new jobs as we emerge from this recession. Make no mistake about it. The price caps called for by this Durbin Amendment will lead to fewer debit cards offered by community banks and credit unions. It will limit the size of debit card transactions, and it will end free checking for small businesses as they rely on these institutions. These changes will limit the ability of small businesses to conduct daily business. They will increase banking costs and could limit lending capability of smaller institutions. These changes come at a time when many small businesses are already fully leveraged and have few other options available. So what does this mean for small businesses in Montana? For a contractor in Kalispell, it means he won't be able to use his debit card to buy lumber. It will mean the end of free checking. I know of too many businesses that don't have the option of increasing their lines of credit with their bank or who have maxed out a credit card weathering this recession. Those are the circumstances that folks are forced into, and those are the circumstances that limit our economy. What will this mean for community banks and credit unions that are competing for the business of these small businesses? Community banks and credit unions play an instrumental role in our economic recovery by providing loans to small businesses so that these businesses can grow and hire new employees. Smaller banks treat small businesses better, but smaller banks don't have the means to make up for lost revenue from this federal mandate, and they don't have the volume to make up this revenue elsewhere like bigger banks do. One of the more troubling findings from the NFIB report that I referenced earlier is the fact that community banks have been losing market share nationwide. The report found that the percentage of small businesses served by local banks fell from 31% to 25% between 2009 and 2010. My concern is that this proposed rule will further harm the loss of market share by community banks. It will lead to further consolidation in the banking industry. Community banks and credit unions simply cannot compete against Wall Street unless they provide products like debit cards. They simply can't make this revenue up elsewhere, and they can't compete unless they provide these services. Madam President, this notion that some have raised that these proposed rules are a slam dunk for small businesses, it is simply false. Unfortunately, this is one of the many misconceptions that have been put out there. For example, based on statements that I have heard, some would have you believe that we've been working and analyzing the debit interchange issue for years, talking about all of the hearings that we've had on this topic. The truth is, however, quite different. There's been just one Senate hearing on this issue since 2006, and it was regarding the interchange fees paid by the federal government. The Judiciary Committee has looked at antitrust issues, but they have never addressed the ramifications of this amendment. Never. And no one has been able to explain to me why studying the impact of this rule is a bad idea. Am I suggesting that the debit interchange system is without fault? Absolutely not. But we shouldn't move forward with a rule that will create a whole new set of problems and will hurt community banks and credit unions until we fully studied the impact. If we do not measure twice and cut once, we're bound to create a whole new set of problems that will hurt small businesses and consumers. I sure wouldn't have stepped into the middle of this fight if I didn't think it was critical for the survival of rural America and to the jobs and livelihoods of people who live there. I'm in this job not because I'm known as a guy who stands up for big banks or Wall Street. Far from it. I'm the guy in my party who voted against TARP and against the automaker bailout. I'm in this job because rural America needs a voice at the table. Rural America needs someone on their side to make sure rural communities and Main Street businesses don't get stuck with the short end of the stick when the Senate makes policies like this one. We need to stop. We need to study. We need to make sure we're doing the right thing. Therefore, Madam President, I ask my colleagues for their bipartisan support on a responsible bipartisan bill to delay this rule so we can have time to study the consequences of this rule, both intended and unintended. Our economy cannot afford to let this go into effect. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I come to the floor today as someone who's practiced medicine in Wyoming, taking care of families all across the cowboy state for almost a quarter of a century. And I come as a doctor giving a second opinion, as I have done week after week, about this broken health care law that people all around the country are now very concerned about and the impact it's going to have on their own personal lives. We started the whole discussion and debate about health care that the American people knew what they wanted. They wanted the care they need from a doctor that they want at a cost they can afford. And What we've gotten is something that provides not that at all. So, Madam President, I saw today in the Washington Post under the headline Budget Showdown comments about the President's speech yesterday to the nation. And he did talk about Medicare and did talk about Medicaid. And I believe that that speech was very short, really inadequate on the details. And it was interesting to see what the Washington Post said about Medicaid. It said, the senior administration official speaking to reporters on the condition of anonymity. The details, he said, have not been worked out yet. So we have an anonymous source working in the White House, talking to reporters, admitting that the details have not been worked out. Well, yesterday people heard the President's speech on spending, but it seemed to be higher on political attacks than it was on substantive speech, the things that really we need to seriously be discussing and debating in this country about a huge debt problem with which we are living. The President did mention one bit of substance, though, that really should concern the American people. He said, quote, "We will slow the growth of Medicare costs by strengthening an independent commission of doctors, nurses, medical experts, and consumers who will look at all the evidence and recommend the best ways to reduce unnecessary spending while protecting access to the services seniors need." Well, what this is this is a Washington commission, a commission in the health care law that many know as IPAB. It may sound harmless. It stands for the Independent Payment Advisory Board, and Americans, I believe, need to know more about the details about how this will actually work. Many Americans may not remember that the health care law created this unelectable, unaccountable board of Washington bureaucrats who will be appointed by the President, and the sole purpose is to cut Medicare spending based on arbitrary budget targets. These are cuts above and beyond the $500 billion that was taken from a nearly bankrupt Medicare program, not to save Medicare for our seniors, but to create a whole new government entitlement program for someone else. This board empowers 15 unelected Washington bureaucrats to make these Medicare cuts, all without full transparency and accountability to American seniors and to elected officials. So, once again, this board proves that the President and the Democrats in Congress who voted for the health care law simply didn't have the political courage to make the tough spending decisions themselves. Instead, they took the easy road. They pulled the classic Washington maneuver, create a board, and punt the decisions to them. Well, Congress gave this board its authority to manage Medicare spending. I didn't vote for it. Members on my side of the aisle didn't vote for it. But this is part of the health care law that was crammed down the throats of the American people. Congress abdicated its responsibility to explain to the American people specific payment changes necessary to keep Medicare solvent. Well, let's take a look at what happens when this board actually makes a recommendation. The recommendation becomes law. The recommendation becomes law. Now, how can we prevent that from becoming law? The recommendation will become law unless the House and the Senate each adopt, not by simple majority, each adopt by a 3/5 majority, a resolution to block them. That's not enough. First, you need 3/5 of the House, 3/5 of the Senate, resolutions to block what this board has recommended. And then the House and Senate have to pass legislation to achieve equivalent savings of what this board claims to be saving by the care that they deny. Well, this is an incredible concentration of power that should belong in Congress to a board of unelected individuals who are appointed by the President. Now, is there concern about this? Well, in the House of Representatives there is. There's been a repeal provision that would repeal this board. And I will tell you, Madam President, it is a bipartisanly co-sponsored attempt to repeal this provision. So that's what we're looking at now. Why? Because the President and the Democrats refused to take a leadership role and to just punt this down the road. They simply threw up their hands, said, let someone else do it. This is not health reform that is good for patients, for providers, the nurses and doctors who take care of those patients, or for the taxpayers. Well, fortunately, Senator Cornyn of Texas has introduced a Health Care Bureaucrats Elimination Act. This bill will repeal this board in order to ensure the doctor-patient relationship that is important to quality health care for all Americans is maintained. And I'm happy to co-sponsor that with Senator Cornyn. We will continue to fight to repeal and replace this very broken health care law. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The senator from Maryland.
Madam President, thank you very much. Madam President, shortly we are going to be voting 3 votes. One vote will be on the budget for our current fiscal year, the year that began on October 1 and ends on September 30th of this year. That vote, I think we've talked about it at some length. I took the floor yesterday and explained how the negotiated budget for this year is far better than the Republican-passed budget in the House of Representatives, the original H.R. 1. I pointed out how the budget represents the vision for our future, that it's a policy document. And I far prefer the agreement that was reached that preserves America's ability to have a competitive workforce. I pointed out yesterday, and I'll repeat again today, that the budget we will vote on will maintain most of the funding for NIH research, basic research, which is critically important for innovation in America. That's the basic research that's used by our high-tech companies, so America can out-innovate our competitors. Whereas the House-passed budget would have cut $1.4 billion from NIH research. Or how the agreed-to budget will provide for job training and Job Corps pretty much at the current rates, whereas the Republican-passed House budget would have eliminated most of the funds for job training and 40% of the funds for the Job Corps. Or for our students and the Pell Grants, we're maintaining the funding so that students can continue to receive $5,550 maximum under Pell Grants. And as I pointed out, college education tuition is going up. The House-passed budget would have cut 15% off of that program. And perhaps the one that really points, I think, the major difference between where the Republicans were on the budget and what we finally ended up is the Head Start program. The Head Start program has worked very effectively in all of our states. Children who participate in Head Start do much better in life. We know that. And the House-passed budget would have cut the number of children in Head Start by 218,000. Eliminating 55,000 teachers and assistants from the Head Start program. I'm pleased that the agreement that was reached will maintain all services at Head Start so all of our children can continue in that program. And the list goes on and on about the compromises that were reached, but I want to make it clear. This was a true compromise. This was not what the Democrats wanted or what the Republicans wanted. It's going to be painful. There's a lot of things in here that I would like to see done differently. I point out, for example, that the GSA budget is going to be reduced by $1 billion. In Maryland, in the White Oak facility for the FDA, we are doing some critically important construction work to bring together the different participants for the safety of Americans. Well, that program is going to be severely slowed down as a result of the cut to the GSA budget. I pointed out that on the environmental front, the Endangered Species Act, that there's a provision in here that delists the gray wolf. That shouldn't be done through congressional action. That's a dangerous precedent for us to go down. I pointed out that the community development block grants are cut. And even though the EPA budget, which would have been cut by 30% with the House-passed budget, we bring that down by 50%, so it's only a 15% cut, but a 15% cut is too large of a cut for the Environmental Protection Agency. Good news is that we were able to remove those riders, those policy riders, that would have prevented the Environmental Protection Agency from protecting the environment, protecting our public health. Those were eliminated. But I really want to speak for the next few minutes about the other two votes that will be taking place on the floor in a few moments. They're votes on what are called correcting resolutions. Now, let me explain this, because I think it might surprise some of the people to learn. We're not talking about the amount of dollars that are going to be appropriated in this current year's budget. These are restrictions as to how money can be spent. So it really deals with a philosophical agenda, not a budget agenda. This is not about reducing the deficit. This is about trying to impose a philosophical position on the budget for this year. So let me talk about the two correcting resolutions, and I'm going to urge my colleagues to vote against both. One would restrict funds going to Planned Parenthood, women's health care issues, which I call war on women. This deals with Title X funding. Now, Title X funding is used for preventive health services, cervical cancer screenings, breast cancer screenings, immunization, diabetes and hypertension testing, sexually transmitted disease testing and treatment, HIV testing, and referrals. Madam President, not one dime of the federal money can be used for abortions. That's the current law, the current prohibition. Currently, there are approximately 5 million people who benefit from Title X funding, over 4,500 clinics across the nation. 91% of the people who take advantage of these clinics have no health insurance. Less than 25% of Title X funds go to Planned Parenthood. And Planned Parenthood spends approximately 3% of its total budget on abortion services, not one dime of which is federal funds. Not one dime of which is federal funds. So this is not about abortion. This is about whether we're going to be able to provide preventive care to our most vulnerable in America. And it's an attack on women, because women are the basic beneficiaries of Title X funds. It's going to cost us more money through the use of emergency room services. It makes no sense at all. It's certainly counter to what we all say we want, and that's gender equity in health care in America. And I would urge my colleagues to vote no on that correcting resolution. The second correcting resolution is an attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act that we celebrated its anniversary just a few weeks ago. Well, if you're a senior, you should be concerned about this vote, because now you have a wellness exam annually under Medicare that's reimbursed, so you can take care of your own health care needs. That would be put at jeopardy. If you are one of those 3.2 million Americans who fall within the so-called donut hole, the coverage gap for prescription drug coverage, you should be concerned about the repeal. You got $250 last year. You're going to get 50% of the cost of your brand name prescriptions covered, and by 2020, we're going to close the donut hole altogether. That would be eliminated if this continuing correcting resolution were to pass. If you're a senior, you should be pleased that at last we've been able to extend the solvency of the Medicare program by 12 years. And quite frankly, you should be worried about what efforts are being made here to privatize the Medicare system, making seniors pay more for their health care. It starts with this vote later today, where we can reject the efforts to turn back the clock on Medicare, where seniors would have to pay more. If you're a small business owner, you should be pleased by the tax credits that now are available, in which this correcting resolution would take away from you, making it more expensive for you to provide health care for your employees. If you're a consumer and you're now able to cover your child up to age 26, 1.2 million Americans, the correcting resolution would turn the clock back on the progress we've made in fighting the abusive practices of private insurance companies and dealing with pre-existing conditions. If you have a child with asthma, now you can get full coverage. If we turn the clock back by approving that continuing resolution, you'll be at the mercy of private insurance companies to provide you coverage, which very unlikely will happen. I could talk about emergency room visits and where some insurance companies require pre-authorization. I don't know how you get pre-authorization when you need to go to an emergency room. Well, we corrected that in the Affordable Care Act. Once again, the correcting resolution that are being asked to vote on will turn the clock back on that, putting you at the mercy of private insurance companies as to whether they'll cover your emergency room visit. And if you're a taxpayer, which is what we're talking about today with the budget, you should be very much concerned about this correcting resolution, because by turning back the clock on the Affordable Care Act, it costs the taxpayers over $1.5 trillion over the next 20 years. So it's counter to your need. But if you have pride, as I do, that America at long last has said that health care is a right, not a privilege, and recognizing we need to do more to improve our health care system, you want us to move forward and talk about the health care issues and try to improve our health care system. You don't want us to turn the clock back. The large number of people who have no health insurance or have restricted coverages because of the abusive practices of private insurance companies, or your inability to cover your children after they graduate from college, that's now been corrected. And we certainly don't believe that a correcting resolution would take that away from us. So, Madam President, I take the floor today to say we're going to have 3 votes. And I just urge my colleagues to vote against both of these correcting resolutions. They're an attack on women's health care issues, and they're an attack on quality health care for all Americans. We need to pass the budget, but these correcting resolutions should be defeated. And with that, I would yield the floor.
The senator from Iowa.
Before I